Hello everybody. I'm here to share my Junk Journal July Challenge journal. For this one, I use sewing tissue as my cover, and a lot of you have been asking how I made the cover, and it's pretty basic really. I just layered the tissue and then stitched around with my machine, and that was my cover. Sometimes in the past I've used fabric between the tissue, but it's not necessary. I've been using this journals all of July, and it got a little tattered on the edge, which I like, but it's held up really well. I just did a little collage. Instead of adding fabric and lace to the cover like I usually do, I did some collage with the Tim Holtz collage paper and washi tape, and I really was happy with how it came out. I really like it. So let's go inside. I'll give you a tour. I think I'll take this off. Okay, this page was the first day for me, but the second day of the challenge. The prompt was make a collage, and so I used the Tim Holtz Found Relatives, some pressed flowers, some layering, little bit of vintage paper there, and Tim Holtz papers, and that was it. This day was use a tag. So I cut 2 tags with my Tim Holtz die and used those in a collage with some wallpaper and laces and fibers. This is from the Tim Holtz crochet die, which is really neat. And then number 3 for the third day. I made this as a flip, but this wasn't part of the challenge. I just did it because I wanted to. So the next day was very vintage. So this one, I used an old button card with some beautiful mother of pearl buttons. And this photo I found in a book that I bought, and I just thought it was so neat. So neat, just everything vintage on this one. For this one, it was favorite color, and I chose this color for this day because I love this blue. These blues, these shades of blues are just gorgeous in the Tim Holtz paper. So I used the paper dolls and Tim Holtz frame and ephemera, the metal number 5, little button under there. Those little girls are so adorable. Okay, so then the next day was Note to Self, and I used the Tim Holtz tissue as a background and the metal date dial, which I love these. They're really neat as used as a frame. They're really neat. And then I used a little bit of gold and silver foil, and really not a lot, little lace. This day was, I don't know if this was botanical or if it was, it might have been botanical. But anyway, I just used the Tim Holtz papers with some of my pressed flowers, a little bit of layering, and that's a Tim Holtz ephemera. So pretty. This prompt was minimal or minimalist. So I just used a little bit of the Tim Holtz wallpaper, a found relative, some lace. Really not a lot, but I thought it had a lot of impact. I really like it. And then I skipped over those pages. And, oh, this was quote. And so I used 1 Corinthians 13, which I have a rubber stamp for. So I just used some black embossing powder and embossed that. And then added a little Tim Holtz assemblage charm, little locket, it opens, little button, vintage button. And the next day was handwriting. And so I made this to flip. Used a Tim Holtz frame and some vellum, which I love the Tim Holtz vellum. I hoard it. And for these, the die cut leaves, I used Distress Oxides, and I really like how that came out. A little pressed flower where the petals fell off. I like it. I thought that was neat. That's it. This day, I don't remember the prompt either. But what I did was stamp on tree bark, and I used my stamp platform, and which gave me a really good image, I thought, on bark. It really came out pretty good. Just a pressed leaf. So that was kind of fun. I liked that day. This prompt was washi galore. So I covered everything with washi, and then used a Tim Holtz frame and the little Tim Holtz number. I put some cardboard under that to lift it a little bit, pressed flower, and that was washi galore. This might have been floral. Anyway, I used a Tim Holtz metal frame and some pressed flowers, Tim Holtz ephemera, a little image from a vintage book. This page I skipped over so I could use the next page as my background, and I just did some washi on here, little collage paper. This one was a postcard. So I used a vintage postcard from my great aunt. She saved everything, which I'm so happy she did, and I have stacks of her postcards. And this one is really beautiful. Even in the real one is more so. It's embossed and it's just gorgeous. But the copy is pretty good. I thought it came out all right. And so I just used some Tim Holtz ephemera, and then on the back I put her picture. It's not the best picture of her, but that's her. Some stamping and Tim Holtz ephemera and collage paper, little lace. She actually crocheted this and this. And the next day was lyrics. So I printed my song out and was able just to put the very first of it down, which is all right. I like that. And just use some collage paper and a velvet leaf and fussy cut some of the Tim Holtz papers out. This day was sketch, and so I can't sketch. So I stamped on vellum, and then underneath I tucked in some pieces of ephemera and used some pressed flowers on the top. I like it. It came out neat. This one is pretty neat. The prompt was male theme. And I used this really sweet letter that's in the Tim Holtz paper stack. I don't remember which one. It's in one of his paper stacks. And it's so neat. So I use that as the background, and then a glassine envelope, and then some ephemera pieces. Everything's Tim Holtz on here. All the ephemera, the washi, everything except maybe this and this and this. But anyway, I thought it was neat. And this was hidden. So I used this trim that I found at an antique mall. This is the last of it. I love it. And then my pressed flowers and a metal Tim Holtz frame. I love how his stuff goes with the vintage. Vintage in his stuff always goes so well. Vintage button. And then I used it as hiding this frame. These are the Tim Holtz transparent wings, I think they're called. I just doubled them up there and used the little hardware heads, which are so neat. I love those little things. And then I used a large tea bag and put a couple of his found relatives in there. Not his, but I like the way the tea bag gives a neat look. And then the next page was layers and stamps, I think. And stamps, I chose rubber stamps. And I rubber stamped these butterfly images and then embossed with black embossing powder. This one was cut from this, and then I just flipped it over and then just did lots of layers of Tim Holtz papers and the ledger, the vintage ledger. And that was those 2 prompts in one day. And then this day was weekly highlights. And I used some collage paper, old vintage paper. I just stamped my favorite weekly highlights down because I have a stamp with all different kinds of words, and then just put it in the envelope. This envelope, I've been doing these envelopes this way for a long, long time, and it's my favorite way to alter an envelope. I just turn it on end and then fold back the flaps, and it makes a really neat pocket. And then the next day was, dark and moody. And so I used a technique for this tag that I learned by watching a Tim Holtz video where he uses the distress crayons and a stencil to remove and a baby wipe to remove some of the crayons, and it leaves this really neat effect. So I just used one of my pressed flowers, little metal charm, and it's really a neat technique. I really thought it was fun. Hadn't tried it before. And then I skipped these pages. And then this prompt was pocket and window. And so for the pocket, I used my Tim Holtz die and cut this pocket. Use some of the crochet trim and a metal key. This is one of the Tim Holtz keys, and vintage buttons and lace. And then I just cut a window in this tag that I've sewn into the signature. And one of his found relatives, little bee. And then I skipped these pages. This I just was sticking my washi back here when I had extra like left over. I would just put it down, and I kind of like it. It came out really neat. And then this was like a bonus pocket that I did where I cut a pocket in the tissue, and so the whole back page is a pocket. And then this is another one of the distress crayon little art pieces. I thought she was so sweet. So that, you guys, is it, except for I usually put on the back page or the back cover, I put an eyelet with a Tim Holtz swivel clasp, and then these are the Tim Holtz assemblage pieces, which I collect. I have a lot of these. I love them. And so that's it, you guys. That's my journal for July. I hope you liked it. I hope it answered your questions about how I made my cover. And thanks for watching, guys. Talk to you next time. Bye.